with you guys, because if we look at the history back there 80 years ago, it was not only just a year for the victory of the Great Patriotic War. From the China side is the Chinese People's War of resistance against the Japanese aggression. So from the entire world side is the anti-fascist war. So certainly from the Chinese side, because China has played a vital role in the Asian battlefield, we suffered a little bit longer than you guys. It can be traced back to 1971. So certainly China understands the sacrifices in the World War II. And that's why that totally makes sense for the Chinese President Xi Jinping to come and pay the state visit to Russia. I think that also can apply to many other countries who have bear the sacrifices or that 80 years ago to come over. And this is really a historic time to remember what's happened in the past and learn from the lessons.
Well, absolutely. We can also just see we're showing images of President Putin personally welcoming all of them. That was, of course, the Kazakh President Tokayev. So I think it shows you how glad I think he is to be joined by such a strong force that people, like you said, from all over the world. And I think it's true that maybe, for example, the Asian theatre of war was slightly overlooked. But that's not to say that, you know, by the European, for example, theatre, right? But it's not to say that the contribution was obviously, and the fight was not as strong. I mean, the Chinese people lost around 20 million people. After the Soviet Union, that was the largest contingent that died. And what's interesting is that President Putin's actually set to visit Beijing in the autumn, right? There are plans. And he said that that's in order to celebrate the surrendering of the Japanese forces. So it seems like these two are really projecting this commitment. We are brothers in arms here, and we are going to stand for the defense of truth and of historical fact. Do you think that's the way that these two see it?
Obviously, the historical fact you mentioned about that, also mentioned about the two presidents, they should take the advantage of this year of 2025 to remember, to hold a correct view of history. Now, you mentioned about the sacrifices. What the gain over the sacrifices is certainly the United Nations model, because before the end of the war, China and Russia helped establish the founding of the United Nations, and that is the unilateral world. And now at this moment, we're facing a rising trend of protectionism and unilateralism, sometimes bullying. It's even more important to uphold the authority of the United Nations.
Well, I think, Yun, to pick up on that, it's interesting the tone that we had coming out of that Xi-Putin meeting.
Just gonna say, yeah.
Exactly, about solidarity, and compare and contrast that with the tone that's coming out of the White House, because you obviously referenced the tariff war. The US seems. Do you see differences in approach between these two sides of the US?
Obviously, China has dire disputes when it comes to the trade. I mean, the United States is really raising the bar and saying that, hey, we should reach a deal with the China side. But China has been always claiming that the United States is saying one thing and doing the other. I mean, if you want to sit down and talk, certainly the previous thing is that you stop such kind of bullying.
Fascinating just to hear, because it's not something the West tends to hear a lot about. The sacrifices, the sheer amount of deaths that came from the East. Just one stat got me the other day, just before we say goodbye. Indonesia, a country that not a lot of people hear about in terms of World War II, lost more people than Britain, the US and France all together. So it really does put it in context then compare the Soviet Union and China and what they lost in the war. You know, you see it so well. Thanks so much for coming into us as well on this chilly and windy but very important day. So we do appreciate it. Yunfei Zhao, CGTN correspondent.
Thank you for having me.
Well, indeed, 80 years ago, this is why we are here. The Soviet army had been sweeping across Europe, liberating cities from the horrors of Nazi occupation as Hitler's Third Reich crumbled into infamy. Today, 8 decades after that extraordinary victory, people in European capitals have been reflecting on just what it meant to them and the world at large.
I'm incredibly grateful of the support from the Russian troops because I actually have lived in Berlin and seen the part of history of the Russian victory against the Nazi regime, and I'm incredibly grateful for their sacrifices that they've made.
This should definitely be celebrated because it speaks for all of our freedom. So without this action, without the victorious powers, including the Allies, we would not be free, and that is definitely a reason to celebrate.
For me, it means that they liberated us from some kind of domination. We should celebrate that because we should honor the memory of those who fell for this freedom.
From a historical perspective, it is a significant date, and especially for newer generations, it is important to remember it so that they know what was happening in Slovakia at that time.
The most important thing is not to forget. In Prague, too, of course, the 9th of May is the Victory Day. To omit the enormous merit of the Red Army, the thousands and millions of dead, only a fool could overlook that.
The Czech Republic was largely liberated by the Soviet army. Recently, some have been saying that it is necessary to remove this so-called burden of the liberation. Of course, history mustn't be rewritten in any way or decorated for a new time. History must be remembered because our ancestors lived it all.
I believe it's important to celebrate this day because, after all, it was the end of the Second World War, which we, for heaven's sake, do not want to live through again.
I think it must be very important. You understand what I am talking about. It was the best that could have happened for our democracy.
History must not be forgotten. The schools must work on that. I know that they don't like to teach about the Second World War in German schools, but the youth, if they want to learn more, can find a lot of stories in the internet.
Well, just to point out, we are just minutes away from the actual official start of the parade on Red Square behind us both. We'll be going, of course, live to that. You will not miss a single moment. We promise you that. Saskia, it's getting, you can just feel it here. The anticipation has been growing throughout the morning as well. We've just been looking at veterans getting into their mobile cars, going up the hill from down below St Basil's and moving on to Red Square. So everybody's getting their places for the big start.
Absolutely. And I think about 10 seconds before the camera came back to us, we suddenly heard, and just imagine we're across the river and we've also got Red Square, which is about 330 metres long. The band is at the other side. And from there, we can hear the music as it literally, we heard the drums start. So I don't know whether they're just warming up the crowd, warming up the soldiers' infantry boots as they start to march along. But it seems we've had this parade. They've been going, they've been lining up. We saw the women. I spotted them as well. Yeah. They're going to be out there. We've seen the different colours, the different uniforms, the different flags.
Incredible.
So,
just one point to note as well is that the last big anniversary, the 75th, it was diminished somewhat by COVID. People couldn't come out and celebrate. It was done online, basically. So in terms of big anniversaries, the 80th one, they've essentially been waiting 10 years to celebrate this.
Absolutely. And I mean, I think you can feel that May holidays are generally, I think, very special for the Russian people. You get a lot of domestic tourism when you walk around the city. There is just a different vibe in the capital. And there are so many events going on. For example, a cinema next to me Academy is showing a very famous Soviet film called The Cranes Are Flying. There are different theatrical performances all along the boulevards. There are also going to be musical events too. People on the streets are handing out these, the St. George ribbon, which hopefully we'll also get a chance to talk about because they're so integral to people really demonstrating their pride in their ancestors. The whole city is one way or another engaged in this
large, yeah.
in 1 hour and, you know, in a few minutes. That's usually how long the parade takes. On that, all eyes, millions of people across the country, their eyes are going to be on Red Square.
All right, so in the meantime, as we're just counting down to that, just minutes away, let's try and get a brief word from our, as you call it earlier, an army of correspondents across this city, but essentially in the epicenter of it, surrounding Red Square. Let's speak to Shay first. Shay Bowes, we know that you're close to the action. How is it?
The anticipation is rising. The band just struck up and the choir sang a very rousing military song, and the veterans up in the stands here erupted into spontaneous applause. So there's a sense of anticipation. The sun is shining. The pace markers who are going to march out the pace for the different regiments and battalions are ready. We're all waiting for the clock to strike, the marshal of the parade to arrive and to announce this very sombre occasion, a remarkable occasion. A real sense of anticipation, as I said, but it's also tinged with a sense of excitement. And the big guests here, the most important guests of any who are here, are the ones that are here. And I can see them right beside me, watching proudly as this event unfolds. They've made it this far, and it's quite remarkable. And I suppose today's really about them, and we bid them the very best for the future as they look back on this important history and how important it is for us today. As I say, probably more important today than it was a year after the great victory, and growing in importance year after year. So we're all standing here waiting for the big show to kick off.
Well, it looks like it's inching ever closer. We've just got word that, of course, one of the most important people, the Supreme Chief, the Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Armed Forces, Vladimir Putin, he's also on his way. In fact, we think that he's
just arrived.
We can't quite see him, but maybe with some binoculars we could get around that view. In the meantime, let's also try and get in some with Charlotte Dubensky, who's also, if I'm not mistaken, standing in the shadows of St. Basil. Lottie, just talk us through how you're feeling about it.
Yeah, one of my favourite views in Russia, in Moscow particularly, so I'm quite happy to be here. And in fact, this is my very first victory day, so really excited to get to see all of the military machine, all of the soldiers passing through, and also to see those foreign troops that have come here, been practising so hard with their Russian counterparts to be part of this Victory Day parade on this 80th anniversary. And what a glorious day to pay tribute to the veterans of that great patriotic war. Shay was saying there that he's with some of them, not many left now, but they will never be forgotten. Not forgotten on days like this, and never forgotten by their relatives who every year go out with the immortal march to remember those who are in that immortal regiment, who paid the ultimate sacrifice with their lives for the freedoms that we have today.
Absolutely well said. Charlotte Dubensky there in the shadow of the iconic St. Basil's Cathedral. You'll be hearing it get very loud very shortly, Charlotte. But for now, we say goodbye. We've been talking, haven't we, Saskia, just about how basically every family has been affected by this in the Soviet Union. You know, it's a huge country, the biggest country in the world, 150 million people, thereabouts. And not one family essentially has not been touched throughout the Soviet Union as well. You're not alone as well. You were telling me earlier about your grandmother.
Yeah, so, I mean, I was going to say, you know, this is an event that's obviously about pomp and it's all about celebration and it's big and it's extroverted. It's very intimate.
It is.
And it's very introverted too. And people are going to reach into their photo albums and look for photos of their ancestors, and I do that too.
Yeah.
In about 1942-3, a 15-year-old girl lied about her age. She joined up to fight and she saw active combat. She was actually at the Battle of Lenino, that's in Belarus. And she also stood on the east bank of the Vistula River in Poland, and she looked across as the resistance launched its final and very bloody uprising against the German troops. She, unlike 70 of her comrades, part of the Emilia Plata Women's Battalion, the only and the first, actually, all-women's Polish infantry unit within the Red Army. Unlike 70 of her comrades, she lived to see the 9th of May. And she went home, she finished university, she became a neurosurgeon, she fell in love, she got married, and she had 2 children, one of whom was my mother. That was my grandmother. Yeah. And she passed away when I was very young. I can't say that I knew her, but I do have a photograph of her from the war in her uniform.
Which you treasure, of course.
And I treasure, and it's black and white. It's barely passport-sized. Mm-hmm. And it gets yellow with every year. It gets a bit more worn at the edges with every year. And, you know, for about 364 days of the year, she is that photo. But on this day, today, she comes alive, and she almost reaches through time to me, or me to her. This day is a portal to the past. Yes. You know, we summon collectively millions of souls long departed, but whose legacy lives on in us and in the world that we rebuilt on a soil drenched in their blood and their sacrifice.
Well said. Okay, so here we have it now. We cross to Red Square for the beginning of official Victory Day 2025.
Государственный флаг Российской Федерации.
Parade.
И знамя победы. Смирно.
Attention, under the banner of the victory. The state flag of the Russian Federation and the battle banner of the 150th Idritskaya Rifle Division are brought onto Red Square. This sacred scarlet banner, raised above defeated Berlin in the spring of 1945, has forever become the ultimate symbol of our people's victory over fascism. Today, the state flag of the Russian Federation and the victory banner are held proudly by honor guards of the 154th Separate Preobrazhensky Commandant Regiment, Sergeant Ivan Burchikov and Senior Sergeant Dmitry Monasterov. Leading the flag-bearing units are Captain Kirill Gorshinov and Lieutenant Anton Mikhailov.
Well, that 154th that we're looking on at the screens at the moment, they always open Victory Day parade. That is their unique honor. And I actually once met someone from Kaliningrad who was part of that. And I said, how on earth did you get that honor? He said, I was just the right height. There's a very, very strict control on the height. And in fact, back in the day during Victory Days, apparently there were very stringent conditions. You had to be younger than 30 years old and about 176 meters high. So about my height. And of course, they were carrying the flags that mean so much to the Russian people, the tricolour, and of course the victory banner.
And the pride of the veterans looking on at those troops marching, as Saskia says, the first of the parade in their beautiful colour. And really, that is who it's about. It's the veterans who brought victory for their nation, for the world, as we've been laying out as well. And that's the thing, it's sad, but every year, every few years, there's fewer and fewer veterans that come who actually took part in it. So it's an absolute privilege to see those as they're here telling their stories, their great-grandchildren, great-great-grandchildren hearing it and having that link to the past, to what was the greatest victory of the 20th century.
Yeah, the song, just because I can hear it from where we are, it says "Вставай, страна огромная." It's about standing, a large country. It always starts. That is a song that became really an unofficial anthem of the Second World War. You know, picking up on what you said about these generations, you can imagine for veterans, some of whom might very well have participated in that original march. They're sitting in the stands now, but they imagine the feelings that they must have had when they returned in 1945. Battered and bruised and bloodied and scarred physically and psychologically.
Guilty for staying alive, but also feeling triumphant for winning.
And imagine that, having not seen Red Square, some of them maybe not having seen their homelands for years, they then marched out onto that square. And of course the Kremlin is not just a seat of power, is it? It is a symbol. It is a symbol of the entire Soviet might. The feelings that they must have had, awe-inspiring, to have known that they came home triumphant, they defended their homeland, and to have been welcomed, the crowds that were out on those days after years of suffering. And they must look at these younger generations now, and it's almost like they're handing this baton to them. You know, and that's why actually I'm so glad that we have our 3D graphics where we saw the past intersect, right, with the present. How that parade spilled into this parade, how today's soldiers stepped into the boots of yesterday's soldiers too. It shows so well this locking together of generations, which of course breeds such a deep sense of belonging. Yeah. And I think identity is very important to this parade.
There's
there we have
Rusov, the defense minister of Russia, as well, as he inspects the troops. And of course there's all different factions of the Russian military. You'd have the army, the navy, the air force, all in their respective uniforms and gleaming in the Moscow late spring sunshine.
The only thing worth mentioning here about the defense minister, Andrei Belousov, he's in civilian clothing. I will challenge someone, I might be wrong, but I believe he might be the first person to be wearing not military uniform, but in fact a suit. Because of course, he is not a military man. He is an economist actually by nature.
Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation. The troops of the Moscow garrison participating in the parade to honor the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War have been assembled. Commander of the parade, Army General Salikov, reporting. Review of parade formations of the Moscow garrison begins. Today, over 11,500 troops from the Russian Ministry of Defense and other security agencies, the FSB Amercom, and the National Guard take part in the parade. Over 1,500 service members in the parade formations are the veterans of the special military operation. Minister of Defense Andrei Belousov proceeds to greet the ground forces troops. Greetings, comrades. I congratulate you on the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War.
Our RT correspondent Shay Bowes is watching this happen in real time, very close. Shay, take us through what it's like.
Experience this booming sound from the military bands, and of course this cheer of "Hurrah" as the Minister of Defense, Andrei Belousov. This is his first parade, as far as I'm aware. Greets the men of the Moscow military garrison. Over 11,500 troops. It's a huge number of men represented here today, and of course they're going to be joined by contingents from far and wide, from across the naval, the Flot, Ruski Flot, from the Air Force, Aviatia. And it's a huge demonstration not only of military strength but also of organisation and logistics. This is an exceptionally difficult show to put on. This number of men working together in harmony, it's really quite remarkable.
Comrades.
And as you can hear, it's quite deafening.
There we had Shay. Well, I was going to say, actually, that was Shay Bowes speaking to us. I think dropping his voice to a whisper. We're not going to disturb him as all of those boys shout out, of course. And the Defence Minister, he's continuing his drive-by of all of the regiments. He's congratulating them on the victory. And ultimately, then, he's going to end up by President Putin, like we said, the commander-in-chief. And we're going to anticipate, of course, the Russian leader's speech as well. You know what's special about Red Square, and I remember, and I know you've been on there too, it's enclosed on all four sides, which means that that sound that's in there, that they create, all those drums, all of that shouting.
Amphitheatre.
It's an amphitheatre. It doesn't go up, it doesn't dissipate, it bounces around all of those walls. And I remember the first time when I was getting nervous and I was preparing to do my first Red Square live, the director said, "Oh, I've done it so many times." He said, the noise is the first thing you remember because it sounds like you're on the taut part of a beating drum. He said the reverberations that you feel from the cobblestones. It really is a unique event. And just look at the colour as well, the array of uniforms and flags, and look at those heads so perfectly angled. I remember when they walk towards you, you can literally see straight through them. You could shoot an arrow down those lines.
Well, it is where history breathes, from Russian leaders, Soviet leaders, down to Tsars. That is where they would meet their people. And indeed, going to war, this is where the troops would meet before going to the front lines as well, to go and face as the Nazi Wehrmacht were edging closer and closer to the Russian capital, getting within 24 kilometers at one stage. In fact, saying that they could see the domes of St. Basil in the distance, but that's as far as they got, because we should mention, of course, the battle that this city went through, the Battle of Moscow. Again, more than 1 million people losing their lives in order to stop the advance. The first significant defeat that Nazi Germany had ever been inflicted upon came here in this city, in Moscow, stopping that advance. And then that kick-started, of course, more resistance, and that is how it happened. And this is where it occurred. Red Square really is a historical area.
It is, and one of the highlights of the parade.
I congratulate you on the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. The Minister of Defense saluted the parade formations of special military operation participants, the Navy, the Federal Security Service, women service members, foreign military formations, and the youngest participants in the parade, Suvorov cadets, Nahimov Naval School students, Cadet Corps members, and UNARMY representatives. Defense Minister Andrei Belausov has completed his review of the troops and proceeds to the central stand to report to the President of the Russian Federation, Supreme Commander-in-Chief, Vladimir Putin. Comrade, Supreme Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation, the troops of the Moscow garrison are ready for the parade to honor the 80th anniversary parade. Defense Minister Belausov reporting. It is.
Dear citizens of the Russian Federation, the veterans, the dear guests, comrades, soldiers and naval sailors, sergeants and ensigns, midshipmen, officers, generals and admirals. I congratulate you on the 80th anniversary of the victory in the Great Patriotic War. Today, we're all united by feelings of joy and grief, pride and gratitude. Bow indeed to the generation that crushed Nazism, paying the price of millions of lives for the freedom and peace for the entire humankind, who faithfully preserve the memory of those historic, triumphant events. And as heirs to winners, we celebrate the holiday of the 9th of May as the biggest for our country, for the whole nation, for every family, for every one of us. Our fathers, our grandfathers and great-grandfathers saved our motherland and call upon us to defend our homeland and be strong in defending our national interests, our 1,000-year-long history, culture and traditional values. Everything that we hold dear, everything that we hold sacred. We remember the lessons of World War II, and we will never agree with disrupting its history, with attempts at justifying the perpetrators. Our duty is to defend the honor of soldiers and officers of the Red Army and their great feat done by representatives of different nationalities that will forever remain in world history as Russian soldiers. Russia has been and will be the barrier in the way of Nazism, Russophobia, anti-Semitism. Russia will continue to fight atrocities perpetrated by followers of those destructive ideas. Truth and justice are on our side. The entire country, the whole society, the whole nation support the participants of the special military operation. We are proud of their bravery, the strength of spirit that has always brought us nothing but victory. Dear friends, the Soviet Union took the brunt of the fierce blows of the enemy. Millions of people who had known only peaceful labor took up arms and stood strong on all the heights and all the borders, determining the outcome of the entire World War II with their undisputed victories in the biggest battles under Moscow and Stalingrad, at the Bulge of Kursk. The courage of defenders of Belarus, who were the first to meet the enemy, defenders of the Brest Fortress and Mogilov, Odessa and Sevastopol, Murmansk, Tula, Smolensk, the heroism of the people of besieged Leningrad, the courage of those who fought on battle lines in partisan units and in the underground, the courage of those who under enemy fire evacuated factories and worked in the rear. The plans of the Nazis to conquer the Soviet Union met the resilience of the country and the heroism of the people. All the republics bore the burden of the war. The contribution of the people of the Central Asia and Transcaucasian region, sending echelons of everything the front lines might need. They housed hospitals where hundreds of thousands of evacuated people found shelter, and locals shared their bread, their roofs, their houses with them. We honor deeply, sons and daughters, fathers, mothers, grandfathers and great-grandfathers, husbands and wives, brothers and sisters, families and friends. We bow our heads to our fallen comrades who died in the battle for Russia. I announce a minute of silence. Two drew almost 80% of the population of the planet. A complete defeat of the Nazi Germany, the militarist Japan, and their satellites all across the world was achieved through joint efforts of the United Nations. We will forever remember that the opening of the Second Front in Europe after the decisive battles on the territory of the Soviet Union brought the victory closer. We highly appreciate the contribution made by the people of China. Everybody who fought in the name of a peaceful future. Dear friends, we will forever look at our veterans and their hope. These traditions, this great legacy, will be given the most important place in our heart. Future generations, we will forever rely on our unity in military and peaceful labor, in achieving strategic goals, in achieving goals in the name of Russia, its magnificence and well-being. Glory to the winning people. Congratulations on a great Victory Day.
Cannons, however, I feel like that cannon has gone straight through. We were warned that it would be amazing. Look at that smoke that we. Part, the President Putin, he's spoken, and it's really what we might have commitment to upholding the past, the truth, the defeat, not just, of course, of Russian people, but the Soviet people as a whole and further afield too. Well, the music now is also going to be kicking into action. We heard the Russian national anthem be played too. That was President Putin's speech, what, around probably 6-7 minutes, which is to be expected. You saw him surrounded there in the stands by veterans, but also by the foreign leaders too. And now it's when it's really going to kick off.
Here we go. And as well, the talking about bringing that up to date as well, but making sure to stress that this is not a political event. This goes way beyond that. It's much, much too important, this remembrance of the defeat of the Third Reich.
Well, joining us now in the rooftop studio, former U.S. Army officer Stanislav Kropivnik. I did try to warn you about the cannons, and you barely even blinked. You said, "Oh, well, I'm a military man. Nothing like this will shake me."
He didn't blink at all.
I know,
I was watching
it's
him.
terrifying. You know, just picking up also on what Yunan said, the drawing of the parallels. I mean, obviously, 1945 came. Fascism was defeated and a new world. Fascism was defeated and a new world order followed. We saw Yalta, we saw how it was. Structuring of the global order.
You know, General Zhukov said growth in all these countries in Europe, partially because they're trying to hold on to what was before, and the U.S. doesn't want to give up the single polar world either, and they're used to being in that family of we're the West and everybody else has to do what we're told. But yeah, the world is changing. China is a prime example. Up to the Opium Wars, China was the biggest economy in the world. It's retaking its own place before. Russia's its own civilization. All of these centers are growing back up to where they were before. So that unipolar moment was literally just a moment. But they don't want to face reality. They don't want to let go. And they're trying to hold on to what they can't hold on to.
What's your view of the marriage of actual military infrastructure out here today? Because we've seen a mix of, Soviet things that are still right up to date and also brand new. We saw the Gurin attack drones, very first time as well. What does that tell us about putting that forward and putting it to the forefront of such a day?
What's interesting about this parade versus previous parades is there's a lot less equipment that's still in development that's being showcased, and more equipment that's been brought up, modernized, that's actually on the battlefield right now. So you're seeing the equipment, the modernized versions of the equipment that's actually doing the job that it's supposed to be doing.
Just on that, just to mention the Reshnik, because I was expecting something on that, but the hypersonic missile, it wasn't shown today. But it is the military of Russia. So in terms of its ability, its use, how big of a game changer is this?
It's a massive game changer. There's nothing that can stop it. When it comes down, you no longer need nuclear warheads to do massive damage to a specific target. There's none of the radiation, there's no fallout, there's not a big cloud, but you're still destroying the object that you're aiming for, and destroying it deep in. I mean, when those warheads are coming down, they're doing Mach 10 plus. And they're just melting through everything. So this is an entire game changer. Just to make an example, the U.S. just canceled, quietly of course, the U.S. just canceled the Halo system project for the U.S. Navy. Last year they canceled the Arrow system. U.S. can't get first generation hypersonic missiles to work right. And they've been trying for 20-something years. So, of course, they didn't believe that Russia had hypersonics. It's all CGI, it's all fake, until the special military operation started, and you saw the Kinjals flying, and then they had to face the reality of, no, it's not fake, it's real, and we're 3 generations behind.
I mean, what's interesting, you're comparing that, obviously, the American and the Russian technology at the moment. I mean, Chinese are also at the forefront of hypersonic missiles. Russia, too, has also exhibited that. And I think President Trump himself recognizes that the US has really lagged behind in this particular sphere, despite, of course, having the biggest defense budget in the world. I mean, how do we explain that? Is it red tape? Is it bureaucracy? Because it's hard to imagine that they don't have, the engineers and the scientists to be able to develop it.
Partially, maybe not. They don't have the engineers and scientists. The education system, well, this is a prime example. The U.S. has the most expensive education system in the world. The official illiteracy rate was 21% last year. I mean, you're looking at, we can spend money, but we can't get any results. And the same thing went to here. They said, oh, the Russians can't do it because they have a small research budget compared to ours. Because the whole concept is you have to have a lot of money, not a lot of talent. Right. And, well, we see the results of that. We see a country that's trying to hold on to a global empire, a global basis, but it doesn't have the infrastructure, it doesn't have the money, and it doesn't have the technology anymore. What the SMO has shown with the equipment that went over to the Ukrainians is that modern American equipment is very outdated. It had its moment in the 90s. It didn't evolve. It was a victim of its own success in the 90s, and now it's outdated.
I remember covering I think it was the 65th, back in 2010, the parade here. And I remember a lot of European flags as well as US flags. There was quite a big presence by the US Army there, marching with their brethren, coming together. That hasn't been seen for quite a few years, though there are veterans here today. Is that a common occurrence that veterans come, or do you think that the greater presence is going to increase between the armies?
Well, veterans have been coming, and as has been said over and over, Russia has always recognized what the other countries have done as part of the coalition that fought the Nazis. And not just Hitler. We've got to remember, Hitler had a whole set of alliances. Most of Europe, as a matter of fact. Most of Central Europe, large parts of Eastern Europe were all within that Hitler's alliance. And Russia always recognized all the nations that fought. Unfortunately, with the Cold War 2.0, if you want to call it that now seems to be happening, Russia's portion is being cut out. Veterans are being told not to go because you'll be arrested. It's the usual lies to keep people from coming. And of course,
But do you see a sea change in that now with the new Trump administration in any way? Because we're starting to see signs of a détente. Does it extend to that as well?
You know, honestly, I don't, and I'll say why. Just this week, we had Secretary of Finance Bassett call President Vladimir Vladimirovich a war criminal. We've had Kennedy, Senator Kennedy came out and said, you know, we're going to turn Russia into fish bait. We've had Representative Fitzpatrick, who, by the way, is a criminal because the 1883 Neutrality Act, which means Americans cannot participate in military combat against nations that America's not at war with. He goes to Ukraine, shoots artillery shells at Russia, and so on and so on. So we're seeing all of this, and not a word from the White House. Not a word to say, we don't support this. And silence, you know, is acquisition to what's happening.
You know, what's also interesting, Trump himself, we know he's a man who likes his social media. We also know that he likes to take credit, sometimes maybe where it's not entirely due. And one thing that I think caused slight laughs around the world recently was when he said, we know that America did more than any other country in the world to win the Second World War. Now, no one, of course, is ever going to diminish the contribution of the hundreds of thousands, of course, of American soldiers who fell in battle. But there is obviously a huge discrepancy between the sacrifices, human sacrifices that the Soviet Union made versus the United States. And my question to you, Stanislav, is, do you think it's a genuine belief? Is that what they're told in America? Or is this, again, the Donald Trump showman?
It's a genuine belief. I've known people that actually had history majors that believe this. When you start telling them the reality of it, they look at you like you're insane. Hollywood has enforced this belief. Total rewriting of history in a lot of areas has reinforced this belief, and people believe it. First of all, most people don't even understand anything about World War II in general. We'll call it World War II because for the Americans it's World War II. They don't believe it. But then you get, you know, for example, I was on a project in Turkey in 2020, and I was watching a British channel, and they had a documentary on World War II and the liberation of Berlin. And they're showing American and British forces, and they announced the Allied forces liberated Berlin. Well, yeah, the Allied forces, you mean the Soviet army liberated Berlin. But that's how they're showing it to the people, and people, well, what do they see? They see Americans, they see British forces. The Americans and British liberated Berlin. So unfortunately, yeah, I believe they actually believe that.
Really interesting point. Stanislav Krupivnik, former U.S. Army officer and friend of the program, thanks so much for coming in on this special day.
Thank you.
Well, you can see the regiments have already started to make their way across. And in fact, we have just got the first contingent that has made their way through Red Square and to our left, back along the bridge. You also saw, I'm sure, a little bit earlier on, horses.
How powerful that is, that vibration, and you really get a sense of the atmosphere and the occasion that we're here for on this 80th anniversary of the defeat of Nazism, of fascism in Europe. 11,500 more than servicemen and women, and also those from the National Guard and the FSB here, as well as some 1,500 veterans of the special military operation that's currently underway. Plus, of course, we've got those foreign troops who've been here. They're here to show off their own marches as well and to be part of this. We've got regiments, if you can hear me, they're getting past, they're getting nice and loud, from the Chinese Republic, from Vietnam, from Malaysia, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Belarus, all here to take part in this momentous occasion. And it really is a momentous occasion, because I think you were talking, guys, in the studio earlier that really 5 years ago, when it was the 75th anniversary, it was COVID, so things were scaled down. So the last time we've really seen the big celebrations was 10 years ago. So now here we are on the 80th anniversary, and it's all guns blazing to make sure that those veterans who are still alive are honoured for the sacrifice that they gave, honoured for the sacrifice of the 27 million Soviet Union citizens and armed forces members. Their lives, patriotic war. A third of those who died in the Second World War came from the Soviet Union, and that is something that should not be forgotten, and that's why it was so important for some leaders of European countries to come to Red Square today. We've talked about Robert Fico from Slovakia being here. We've also talked about President Alexander Vučić of Serbia, both who were essentially told by Europe's top diplomat, Kaja Kallas, not to come under any circumstances or they would suffer the consequences. And both those leaders have gone, do you know what? We need to be here. This isn't about politics. This is about remembering a world war and how it ended and how important Russia, the Soviet Union back then, was to ending that war, in defeating Nazi Germany. And I think that's really interesting, because when we look at what's happened in Europe just 24 hours ago when they were celebrating their victory in Europe Day, there was no sense of Russia being in the picture, no invite for Russia because of the situation at the moment. And it's really, I think, concerning, and it must be despondent for those veterans and their families of veterans who gave their lives to find out that despite that it was the Red Army that went in and took Berlin in 1945, that any flags associated with Russia and the Soviet Union have been banned in the city for the events, even in Treptow, which is the largest Soviet memorial park in the south of the city, completely banned. That was announced by the authorities in the last week and upheld by a court just in the last few days. And I think it's difficult to understand how political events now can play into the commemoration of those people who paid with their blood for that ultimate sacrifice. But here we are in Moscow today. Some European leaders have made the trip to ensure that they are part of that memorial of those who took part in the Great Patriotic War. And, you know, this victory is a victory for anybody who loves free. This is a victory for those who want to have the lives that they'd like to live. And interestingly enough, we're talking about those monuments in Eastern Europe. We're seeing monuments to Soviet soldiers who paid that ultimate sacrifice being torn down. And that must be very difficult for the veterans who are still alive and for their families. But we are here to remember it. And really, the atmosphere couldn't be greater. We think about this amazing weather that we've got. As we remember them, you can hear this shouting as you come past from an incredibly famous Russian poet and a war correspondent. This is Konstantin Simonov. And he wrote wrote this poem that's called Izduminya, Wait for Me. It's incredibly popular here in Russia. It's a beautiful poem, but I just want to read you the last part of it because he wrote it to ask somebody to wait for him. And it says, wait for me and I'll return. Only you and I know how I survived. It's because you waited as no one else did. And for many today in Russia, they're still waiting for their loved ones who are part of that immortal regiment. And they're here to remember them, to pay tribute to them, and to thank them for that sacrifice. And we should all say, glory to the veterans of the
Dubinsky really giving us a flavour of what's happening right behind her back. You know, we've all been lucky, we've been saying over the years, to have covered this Victory Day parade in some form or another. For me, I do actually have a really odd silence. You know, yeah. We never really experience true silence, do we? You know, even if you're in a flat on a Sunday morning, there's a neighbour scraping his chair. In true nature, as well, it's not silence. The trees talk, the animals lurk. But at about 10:20 a.m. on Red Square, there's a true deafening silence. And then we hear the soldiers go, thousands of people who previously had been holding their breath. Then they go, "Ura, ura, ura." And that moment gives me absolute goosebumps. Because in that ura, I hear kind of millions of voices from the past, you know. I hear boys who had barely had a chance to live going over the top with a battle cry. I hear the cries of mothers who found out that their boys who barely had a chance to live life would not be coming home. I hear the cries of babies because even in death there is life. I hear the cries of Leningrad as we were talking about this. After 872 days of unfathomable suffering, they were free. I hear the cries of partisans in those final moments as they're before a wall, before death. And of course, the cry of final victory on the 9th of May 45. And at 2:10 a.m., it's infamous, now famous, Yuri Levitan, one of the most recognizable voices in the Soviet Union. He read one of the most important messages in Soviet history. He declared the defeat of Nazi Germany. And the Red Square was absolutely teeming that morning. And it was filled with widows and orphans and the injured, the sick, the hungry, but the triumphant. So for me, that moment, often it actually does bring tears to my eyes because it resonates so much and it has such an echo of history.
Yeah, well said. But on the topic of silence, we're in one of the major cities of the world here, and you could hear a pin drop from where we are, and that's a little bit of a distance away across the river from Red Square, but just the absolute respect to which this Victory Day is being held, it's in high esteem. But just as well, I want to bring up the issue of celebration here as well, because commemoration, of course, as you lay out, Saskia, remembrance of all those people who lost their lives, the casualties, unfathomable. But also, when you have a victory like this, it opens think that they might see the end of the war. All of a sudden they've vanquished the enemy. A whole new world opens up. Just to imagine, after 1945, within a dozen years, Sputnik was in the air. A few years after that, 4 years after that, you had the first man in space, Yuri Gagarin. So this incredible innovation was just pushed forward right after it. And it goes to show that, you know, when you're facing such an enemy, what you want to do after that is live. You want to live after death.
And you know, I talked about this, I remember last time. For me, this is such a holiday that is a testament, exactly what you're saying, to human perseverance. You know, it's going through some of the bloodiest, darkest times that man has ever known, to come back, to rebuild cities, towns, economies, societies, and then go on, like you said, to innovate and to expand into the future, to rebuild families as well. It's unbelievable what human spirit is capable of when it needs to be.
It faces such an enemy. Well, let's say A grasp on the thick of the action, because another of our correspondents, Uma Ishar, is not too far away. In fact, she had one of the best seats in the house because she saw all the tanks, the vehicles go into the city first of all. Where are you now, Uma?
Okay.
Hi, Uma, you can hear me okay. It's Yunan and Saskia.
Sorry,
What's
guys,
happening where you are?
Sorry, it's very loud here. I
You're
didn't
forgiven.
really hear you. But now Moscow is the center of a grand holiday today, and this traditional parade that commemorates the 80th anniversary of victory during the Great Patriotic just now started. And as you can see behind me, the crews and the military equipment is now, some of the most iconic military equipment samples right behind me are now getting ready all the way from Tverskaya Street to go to the Red Square for the big show. Now, I would like to tell you just a few of the military equipment that will be rolling past me here today, and some of the most iconic, one of them missile Tiger M armored vehicles, the Yars missile system, which ranges up to 12,000 kilometers. You have the S-400 air defense system as well as unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, such as the Oral 10 or the Lancets are a great addition to this parade as well. And you also have the infantry vehicles, of course. But, you know, one cannot talk about this parade without mentioning the iconic T-34 tank. Easy to operate, and it was really the best of its time in the Second World War. And its glory really came about during the Battle of Stalingrad, where the tank helped push over 300,000 German troops back. Now, the atmosphere here, and you can see it's a little tense. They're starting, but it's really you can't really explain it. You can't really put it into words. I mean,
طلاب الكلية العليا لقوات الإنزال المظلي في ريزان تضم تشكيلة أكثر من 100 طالب نالوا أوسمة الدولة خلال العملية العسكرية الخاصة. أكثر من 60,000 خريج سطروا بشجاعتهم وبطولتهم تاريخ قوات الإنزال الجوي.
Russians are ready, sitting at home, turning on their TVs and waiting for this parade to start. I mean, this whole celebration is really to remember what happened in the Second World War and also to cherish the memories
يشارك في المسيرة طلبة معهد موسكو الحدودي التابع لجهاز الأمن الفيدرالي الروسي. جنود القبعات الخضر.
We can see that the military equipment there, they know that their moment to shine. Probably we're expecting within the next 5 to 6 moments. The infantry, they are making their way forward. You can see being watched by foreign dignitaries as well. Look at the array of flags out there. And you know, this is something I also talk about, the preparation that these soldiers and cadets go through in order to prepare for this. They have been training for absolute months. Some of them are picked, in fact, almost a year ahead of time, all for this. These 2 minutes, when they cross 220 steps, as Shay was talking about, to the pace of the drums. All of those months of preparation and polishing and training grounds for these moments of glory.
Perfect synchronicity. Well, another of our correspondents, Donald Quarter, has been telling us more about really the astonishing scale of sacrifice in the war. So take us through again, Don, just why this day is so important to Russia, the world, and many others.
Well, just as our other correspondent Uma mentioned there, right, the armored portion is just revving up their engines, getting ready to start their part of the parade. People are waiting here with bated breath to see these tanks and this military equipment run right through the road behind me on Manezhnaya Square. And of course, as tradition, Dairy T-34 tank, right behind it is a brigade of other T-34 tanks, as well as more modern tanks and other hardware that's going to follow. I mean, in terms of course, the military hardware that was involved in World War II, the Nazis caught the Soviet Union by surprise in 1941. Their idea, of course, was blitzkrieg, lightning war. They wanted to take the Soviet Union by surprise and take it in a matter of weeks, but they stopped them at the gates of Moscow, and many factories were able to be evacuated farther eastward in the Soviet Union. They were not destroyed by the Nazis, and they were able to continue their production of military hardware farther east in the country within the framework of their the Soviets' military wartime planned economy that was able to turn things around in terms of around 1943, pretty much after the Battle of Stalingrad was won by the Soviets in February of 1943. That was when the tide was really changed. That was when reserves were brought from the Far East, more tanks and military equipment that had been produced during the Battle of Stalingrad and before, also when the battle for Moscow was going on. That hardware was brought back to the Eastern Front. The reserves were basically, obviously, bringing more Soviet troops to the front after the Nazis were already on the retreat. And then that was trouble, of course, for the German military that was on retreat pretty much from 1943 onwards. So that's why this T-34 tank, I mean, of course, that tank was one of the main battle tanks in the Soviet military during that time, which you're going to see behind me right now. Here we go, and they've got the red banner on top of the front tank as well. There we go. You're not going to hear much more of what I'm saying here. The whole earth is starting to shake, as it always does on Red Square during the armored portion. So I think I'll hand it back to you, Yunin and Saskia. You guys can look on for yourselves. Что?
Советского Союза социалистического труда и Героя Российской Федерации. 28 из них.
He was on again, the signals coming on and off, but of course you can barely hear anything. Especially because you and I were talking about my family history. It's almost like this strange Narnia-style passage through time. And we see for 2 hours on this stage the psyche, the Russian psyche being played out, which is all about tradition and celebration and respect for the past. And it's basically a very loud declaration of how without a past there can be no present and no future. How can we know who we are, have any knowledge of ourselves if we don't know where we come from, what paths we have walked, whom we met along the way? And all of that is loudly being spoken about every single year here on Red Square. How many times have we all been asked, where do you come from? Well, how can we begin to answer that question if we're not shown with events like this, if we're not standing next to people, our people, and we understand where we want to go together next? And actually someone said to my mother once, summer is just preparation for winter. Well, I'd argue that past is just a preparation for the present. And unless we nourish that past, and unless we fix the cracks that we build on top, all the layers that we put on top, our present and our future, they're at risk of collapse. And yes, of course, values are changing, times are changing, but some things are and should be eternal. And that is something that Moscow and this parade and parades throughout the country are all about. They're not necessarily about one country or one ideology. They are about the millions of people who laid down their lives so that we could stand here today and share their stories. So when we stand here, and we stand here with the St. George ribbon, which is criminalized, in fact, in certain countries, we do that for the people. I do it for my grandmother and my grandfather, my great aunt who fought as a partisan in the wood, for my field producer's great uncle, who was one of the first soldiers deployed to the Far East and who lies there still somewhere. We do it for them. Their stories, our stories, we carry with them in the present, and so we take them wherever we go next. And it's this amazing day where individual stories feed into family stories in order to make national history. This event is a cultivation of self, of national identity, and it is a treasuring of the past, of the degree of human sacrifice. And of course, as we were saying, it is individual, it is familial, and it is the giant family of tens of millions of people who one day stood up and said, essentially, I offer myself as sacrifice. I am willing to lay down my life so that you can have a better tomorrow. Well, like I said, we are celebrating the 80th anniversary of Victory Day. Behind me, of course, the walls of the Kremlin. They're standing timeless. Red Square is getting a bit of a beating, those cobblestones, with the military equipment stretching far into the distance. The vibrant domes, of course, of St. Basil's too. And connecting these landmarks, we've got this Bolshoi Moskvaretsky Bridge. And it's been such a witness to history. And the river unites not just our two sides, but also the past and the present. Well, we have been talking a little bit about the 24th of June 1945, when this very square filled with the triumphant march of the first victory parade. And it was held over a month after the Soviet flag flew high above Berlin's Reichstag. That delay was necessary because Moscow needed time to bring its troops home and prepare for the largest military procession the world had ever seen. That first victory parade was a display of raw emotion and patriotic pride. And Marshal Georgy Zhukov, the architect of Berlin's fall, he rode across the square on a white stallion. And then the soldiers, not just parade ground troops, but frontline veterans, many of whom still bore wounds as they marched across this bridge. And the parade almost didn't happen because of the rain. But Stalin insisted that it proceed. And so beneath the grey skies, columns of T-34 tanks, in fact, ones we just saw that crushed the Wehrmacht, rolled over the cobblestones. 1,400-member band played non-stop for 2 hours, led by Major General Chernetsky, who spent the war composing scores of military marches at the front line. 1,000 artillery guns fired in salute. Scores of trucks released hundreds of balloons into the sky, followed by the national anthem. Around 35,000 people participated, 3 times more than today, with representatives from the anti-Hitler coalition, US, Great Britain, France. This was more than just a military parade. It was a demonstration of Russia's stature. To the Soviet people, its new allies, its adversaries. A testament to resilience, to the millions who fought, suffered, and triumphed over Nazism. Well, 80 years later, we stand here. I've got tanks to my left, tanks behind me too. And we honor those who marched that day, the fallen who never returned, and the unbreakable will of those who fought against Nazism. Today, as the March of Generations continues, we carry forward their legacy, the fight against fascism, the defense of truth, the commitment to peace. Well, I want to cross now to Red Square, because the person who definitely cannot hear right now is Charlotte Dubensky, standing by St. Basil's. Lottie, if anything of your eardrums is left, just talk us through. What does it feel like?
I'm going to have to shout, get closer to the microphone, because I can barely hear myself even think as the tanks, the military equipment is just roaring past me. Just a moment ago I had my head turned towards them and I could see all of the smoke coming out, and I was looking for some of the military equipment that was involved in the Second World War. There you go, getting a little bit quieter now as some of those tanks have gone past me. And one that I was really looking forward to seeing was, as I get louder again, was the self-propelled artillery unit. This is the Su-100s. They were involved in the war in 1944, and actually when they were introduced, they were extensively used, and one of the reasons for that is they were so popular because the gun could pretty much penetrate anything, and as a result of that, that really shocked a lot of the Germans. So yes, a little lull here, but it just feels like this rumbling. You can feel it. It's almost like your heart is pounding, and so interesting to see the equipment that's from the past, that's from the present, and to get a sense of just how enormous these pieces are, how mighty they must have seemed, particularly in the Second World War when there was so much development of military hardware and equipment, and how this fierce tanks, fierce military equipment really did put such the fear into many in the German army. And I think that's important to reflect on that, because can you imagine when we talk about the innovation, there was so much innovation in the Soviet Union during the Second World War when it came to that military hardware, and that really, as well as the sacrifice of course of those who fought, was crucial to being able to defeat Nazism, the Third Reich. And so many times I've read stories about Germans saying they saw the Soviet tanks coming and they'd never seen anything quite like it before. They'd never seen anything that was quite mighty. And I think I was reading that in Operation Barbarossa, which is of course when the Third Reich attempted to invade the Soviet Union and succeeded for a short period, that they were so impressed by the Soviet hardware that they spoke about it themselves. So even as they were in fights with the Red Army and being defeated on the battlefield, they were impressed with the machinery. They saw the might and the courage of the Soviet people, and I think we should never forget that.
Charlotte, you manfully got through that. It's a noisy morning in Moscow, but just as Charlotte Dubensky was speaking, towards the end of the parade now, a lot of the military hardware just coming out behind us here. We've got the anti-tanks, we've already seen the tanks, we've seen the missile charges, the flamethrowers as well are there. A lot going on. Shea Bowes has been watching it just before us, though. He's got the best seat in the house. Shea, how did you find that? It's just coming to a wrap.
It's absolutely remarkable. The ground literally here shaking, all the camera crews from the assembled media. The camera's literally shaking as the self-propelled artillery rolled through. The noise is absolutely immense, the power of these machines. And right now behind us has just passed the S-300, the S-400 air defense system, which is probably the best one in the world, and it's protecting numerous countries. It's the envy of many Western countries, of course, because it's defending Moscow today, it's defending Russia's borders. And as we've heard, the Soviet Union, as you said, Ewan, was a springboard for huge innovation and technology from the T-34, which Georgy Zhukov himself had inputs into from the battlefield. of how they needed to destroy the panther, the tiger. The T-34 was developed as a working, living creature that rolled off the foundry manufacturing line straight out onto the battlefield. And they led the armoured element, if you like, of this movement. Right now behind us you can see the Yars. These are intercontinental missiles, nuclear-capable missiles. They have a range of over 12,000 kilometres, and these are part of Russia's nuclear deterrent. And these machines are absolutely vast in scale. I mean, the wheels themselves are almost 2 meters tall. And again, as they roll past us here, the ground is literally shaking. And it kind of defines the power of the Russian military complex, but it also defines the determination of Russia to defend itself. And if there's any country that understands the necessity to have a strong military and a strong deterrent, it's of course the Russians, who, as we said earlier, have suffered so much at the hands of invaders, from the Mongols to Napoleon to Adolf Hitler, and more recently, of course, the catastrophic incursion into Kursk, where, sadly for the Ukrainians, history has repeated itself. And many of these men, these veterans in these mighty machines, were instrumental in driving the Ukrainian invaders back out of Russia. So it's an immense event. And as we look up, we can see the fly past. I think it's the Russian Knights. Absolutely incredible stuff. And the noise again booming as the veterans look skywards at these incredible formations flying above us here on Red Square. Between the noise of the armour, and here's the Russian tricolour. The white, blue and red again streaking over Red Square here as everybody looks skyward. Absolutely remarkable stuff. And again, the noise is remarkable.
Well, absolutely. You're just across a river and a bridge and a bit of a square, and we can see we've just had the flyby. We have got that tricolor streaking across, and my goodness, what a beautiful day for it. We were worried that the air parade might actually be shown because we've had a bit of a few Arctic winds in recent time. It's been a bit cloudy as well, but everything just went off without a hitch. We just had one of the most... He was talking about the Yars missile that is literally going along the embankment now. And understand that the embankment is usually absolutely empty of people, and now we have the equipment and, of course, the military band you can see striking up, and it plays possibly the most famous war song of all time. And it talks about victory, how long we waited for you, and you finally came. No one, not everyone, had a chance to see it, but we tried as hard as we could to make it come faster. Officially the end.
Officially the end, and I'm just watching the last armoured vehicles just leave Red Square and go along the embankment where we are now. It's quite a sight just watching so many military vehicles go in one direction together. Well, just like that, we've been looking at the air innovation, I would say, as well. It's just absolute perfect synchronicity. After what we saw in Red Square, we looked up to the skies and we saw that tricolour. And so joining us now is aviation expert, former airline pilot, Cyril Delattre. You've been enjoying that beside us. What do you think in general about the hardware that was on show today?
That was a great show. That was one of the biggest ones that I ever seen in my life regarding the Russian military parade, and this is a huge success, an absolute success. It's beautiful.
When you were standing here, one of the things that you pointed out, of course, were the drones. That's a historic moment because they've never been shown, and it shows that wars will probably be fought for the same reasons. It's often power, it's geopolitics, it's resources, but the way in which war is being waged has changed beyond recognition, and drones, they're a key part of it, aren't they?
Drones are a key player in new war since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, and the evolution has been so fast Because a couple of years ago, again, I'm not even speaking about the MQ-9 Reaper or the big drones and stuff like this, just speaking about FPV drones. A couple of years ago, they were still considered as toys to be played in the yard between fathers and sons. Now, today, it's a key point in the conflict. You have drones that can watch kamikaze drones and everything. I mean, it's a huge, huge step forward, and it's a big step forward in technology, and outstanding.
Does that make, I suppose it's an amateur question, does it make warfare safer in the terms of now you're going to be using technology so you don't need to send in manpower and you're able to have more targeted rather than this mass use of ammunition? Or does it actually make it more lethal when you have, for example, AI-guided drones, which apparently have been spotted, actually, developed by Russia?
Well, you see, there is no war or no conflict without death. The more the technology we use, obviously, is to destroy the more equipment as possible to the enemy. So I wouldn't say that the drones are going to be killing less people. What I would say is that drones will help you to save the life of your own soldier in your own camp. But the drill, sorry, the purpose of the drones anyway is to kill a maximum of people on the other side. It's noisy.
Poor Cyril is trying to compete with some of Russia's military hardware, but it doesn't give you a chance. We brought them specially for you. But also talking specifically about the jets that Russia uses. When you compare Russia's technology with those of other nations, what's your general impression of the direction in which Russia's military-industrial complex is moving?
Well, once again, the more we're going forward in the technology, the more heavily equipped aircraft we have. Russia has always been within the top key players in that area. Whether you take the Sukhoi 57, the Su-30 jet, 30, 35, SM or whatsoever, those are fifth-generation aircraft. And from a technology standpoint, it's absolutely perfect. You also have in other country other fifth-generation aircraft. That's not the problem. But for all those people who had believed even one little second that Russia was far, far, far behind schedule, well, that's not the case. Russia is way ahead of schedule. And for example, if you take this 57, if you compare this to other kind of aircraft that we have in the Occident, they are using vectorial thrust systems. United States is using it also, but France, for example, is not using it. Great Britain is not using it. Germany is not using it neither. So, and these give capabilities to that aircraft that are just outstanding.
You're a Frenchman.
Yeah.
So you came here for Victory Day. You came to speak to us as well. Talking about your nation, do you think there's a disconnect between the people and the rulers as regards relations and what the Soviet Union achieved here? Because we're seeing all out the EU trying to stop people coming here to commemorate what's happening. Do you think there's a disconnect between the people and the elites?
They are totally disconnected, and this disconnection is not somewhere new. I'm 55. When I was a kid and when I was studying history at school, in my history books, it was never, ever written that without the USSR and what they did on the East Front, even if we were taught about the East Front, nothing would have been possible in the West. And the overlord operation in Normandy or in Provence and the liberation of Europe would not have been possible without the greatest with the sacrifice of the Russian people. On the other hand, on more recent history, yes, of course, the elite in France and in Europe, they are absolutely disconnected. who the hell is Kaja Kallas? Who the hell is von der Leyen, who has not been elected, by the way? She's been nominated and thereafter elected by a little group of people. Who the hell are they to put threats on a sovereign country like Serbia with Aleksandar Vučić, or Prime Minister Fico, to tell them, oh, if you go to Moscow for the parade, you're going to face problems. Who the hell are they? Come on, this is, I mean, we are celebrating the fall of the Third Reich. If we look at what European Union is doing actually with France, with Germany, with Great Britain, what they've been doing in Romania for the presidential election, sorry, but we're seeing the rise of the Fourth Reich. Literally. I'm sorry to say this that way, but who the hell they are?
When you look also at the wider European attitude, you know, I mentioned earlier how St. George ribbon has been banned and criminalised, in fact, wearing it. Last year, a pensioner in Latvia was actually fined €1,000 for singing a Soviet war song. It seems like the Europeans are almost running from the past. What is it about it that they find so scary, I suppose?
Well, it's rewriting of the history. Once again, it's the rewriting in the history. If you go to Estonia, for example, Estonia is the only country in the European Union where you can find official SS parade, the SS parade, officially in Estonia. Come on, this is stupid. So when you have a country that is capable to do this, how can you expect that country not to be able to rewrite the history, rewrite what SSSR did, and to prevent any remembrance about this? Look at Ukraine. The problem are not the Ukrainian people by themselves, because we know that most of them, they want to live peacefully. But the problem is the government. The problem is the banderism, Stepan Bandera, and the neo-Nazi system that is still implemented in those countries. And after that, you have the European Union that has engaged itself in a path which is a dead end. And for them, Russia is the enemy. And they cannot because they do not want to pull back and say, oh, we made a mistake. No, we're way too clever and intelligent for this to say that we made a mistake. So they are going way forward, and what they are actually doing is adversary accusation. This is exactly this.
But I think the people see through it.
The people see it. There is a big difference between like for French, for example, you have a big difference between the French people and the government. Sure. And the Russian Federation and the Russian people, they know this. They know that
that the Soviet Union does not get credit for. Cyril, a pleasure as always to see you. Thanks so much for coming in. Aviation expert Cyril Delatre.
Welcome. Great pleasure.
Well, indeed. 80 years ago, the Soviet army had been sweeping across Europe, liberating its cities from the horrors of Nazi occupation as Hitler's Third Reich crumbled into infamy. Today, 8 decades after that extraordinary victory, people in European capitals have been reflecting on just what it meant to them and the wider world.
I'm incredibly grateful of the support from the Russian troops, because I actually have lived in Berlin and seen the part of history of the Russian victory against the Nazi regime, and I'm incredibly grateful for their sacrifices that they've made.
This should definitely be celebrated because it speaks for all of our freedom. So without this action, without the victorious powers, including the Allies, we would not be free, and that is definitely a reason to celebrate.
For me, it means that they liberated us from some kind of domination. We should celebrate that because we should honor the memory of those who fell for this freedom.
From a historical perspective, it is a significant date, and especially for newer generations, it is important to remember it so that they know what was happening in Slovakia at that time.
And I want to share my story with you. I want to start off with my great-granddad, Savenko Yegor Borisovich. He was a senior guard sergeant when the war broke out. He was only a 19-year-old cadet at the Ulyanovsk military tank school, and he was sent to the defense of Moscow. And he also participated in the liberation of Kursk, the Battle of the Kursk salient, and as well as the cities in Poland and Poland. Sorry. Off during one of the battles, and he was the only one to survive. All his comrades passed, after he was badly wounded, but he carried on his duty and saved the lives of over 600 soldiers, and for that he was awarded with 3 medals, and I have them
And on those lines could do that. And just on, we mentioned briefly, I think it's worth again elaborating on the siege of Leningrad. From 1941 to 44, 872 days. Food couldn't come in, water couldn't come in. They were waiting so long, but they kept believing that our lives aren't going to end like this. They went working to factories to keep the war efforts going. Can you imagine, like, doing that, starving, but still having enough within you, within your soul, that tough Russian soul, Soviet soul, we should say, other countries, of course, as well. But it just goes to show that this is not just a military victory. It's a victory of the people.
Absolutely, and in some ways the Second World War, the Great Patriotic War, it was called the People's War because there was no single person who could wake up and not in somehow be engaged. They understood that this was a tapestry of victory. You know, you pull one thread and it will all come apart. They needed to come together as a collective to ensure that on that rainy June day in 1945, 80 years ago, we were showing as they crossed here, they needed to come together for that moment.
Absolutely right. Just before we go, we've just got a little bit of time. What was your highlight this year? You mentioned before. What do you think was the thing that stood out most?
Well, I mean, the cannons for me, I think, were quite unforgettable as a viewer, just as an experience. Because, you know, we were saying earlier, you know, the city is completely dead. Remember, this is a city of, 13.3 million people. There is no one on the streets. There are no cars. We've been up. I know, I'm not complaining again, but we got up very early today to be here at 4:30. But it was the most extraordinary experience because we got the build-up to that. And
sure did.
From where and back, and we can see it's still the tail end of it is happening there. They're looking at live pictures on your screen, President Putin with foreign leaders, and of course they'll be heading towards the tomb of the unknown soldier. That's the way the parade always ends. A tribute not just to one, but to all.
To those who never came home, and we'll be following that. But for now, we will say thank you for your company. You've been watching the 80th anniversary of the defeat from Red. But we enjoyed your company. Hope you've enjoyed spending it with us as well, as we just look at Xi Jinping there as well, and other world leaders, Alexander Lukashenko of Belarus too. Over 20 world leaders, as you can see on your screen there written, have joined Moscow for the celebrations. Thank you for watching. From Ewan O'Neill and Saskia Taylor, we'll leave you with just some images and see you again at the top of the hour.